Every country on this planet has a story about its founding. Whether it's about a group of rebels trampling the global superpower, or a pacifist delivering independence for the second largest country on the planet,
the most powerful man of the 20th century,
or some dude pulling out a sword from a rock. They're usually somewhat fabricated and polished ideas of where the country came from, what it stands for. But China's story is different. China's story is a new story, and it is tightly controlled. It's a story that is being used as a weapon to subjugate millions of people, to eliminate ancient cultures, to expand China's borders farther than they've ever pushed before. It's a founding myth that can't be challenged within China, and it has been so heavily peddled and thoroughly implanted into the Chinese psyche that most people believe that China actually looks like this, and that it has always looked like this. But China doesn't look like this. China actually looks a lot more like this. But only if you look at the real history, the facts and the evidence, which is something you can't really do within China. So instead, the Communist Party has created and weaponized the myth of this over the past 70 years to erase these borders, to build islands, to threaten neighbors, and to undertake one of the largest assimilation projects in human history. It's a project that has cost them trillions of dollars and has been responsible for countless horrific human rights violations, all in the name of preserving a pretend version of history. A version that China believes will keep the Communist Party in power and make China the richest, most powerful country on earth. And what's scary is it just might work.
This is the history of the CCP. Xi Jinping does not want you to know.
Several mosques have been destroyed in China's far western region of Xinjiang.
Xinjiang,
One of Xinjiang's holiest sites,
is not only cracking down on Muslims, but on other religions as well. One of the most common sights is the Chinese leader's smiling face.
One of the world's most ambitious construction projects is going on in secret.
Will not let foreign journalists visit those islands in the South China Sea.
我完全统一而奋斗。
Okay, pause for a second. I need to thank today's sponsor because that's how I am able to make these videos. Thank you, NordVPN, who is a longtime supporter of this channel. A VPN is a really cool tool that allows me to connect to the internet through a different country. This is cool because not only can I stream Netflix, that's not available in my country, but is available in the UK, but also I've been traveling lately. And when I'm in Korea, which I just was, and I try to connect to my Gmail or a bunch of other things that I'm logged into, all of these accounts freak out because they're someone in Korea is trying to hack into your email. And I'm like, no, they're not, it's me. So I just now reroute my connection to the US and my Gmail and everything is happy. That is one reason I use NordVPN. But NordVPN has become this way bigger threat protection tool. It has all these great features like blocking malware or malicious ad trackers. It generates strong passwords for you. It's just a super useful tool. And all of this is incredibly easy to use. It's all one click away, super easy, super user-friendly. There is a reason why NordVPN is the leading VPN out there. Right now, they're having a 30-day money-back guarantee. And if you go to the link in my description, which is nordvpn.com/JohnnyHarris, you can get an exclusive NordVPN deal plus 1 month for free to just check it out. Using that link helps support this channel too, so do us both a favor, go click it, go check it out, and surf the internet from around the world and be safer about it. Thank you, NordVPN, for supporting this channel, for supporting this video. Now, let's dive into this kind of heavy but important story about China. Okay, before we dive in, I want to just make it clear that I'm aware that all countries do this thing of weaponizing their history to make themselves look good and totally justify terrible things.
You seem a decent fellow. I hate to kill you.
This video is about China.
You seem a decent fellow. I hate to die.
So, I keep talking about this Chinese narrative, this Chinese myth. What is it? Well, You could hear me talk about it, or we could go right to the horse's mouth and listen to this guy, Xi Jinping, who's probably the best salesman for the Chinese story. Here he is giving a speech where he starts out with his boldest claim of all, that China is this 5,000-year-old civilization.
With a history of more than 5,000 years, our nation created a splendid civilization.
But according to his story, in 1840, outsider Europeans came in and tore apart his unified country.
China was plunged into the darkness of domestic turmoil and foreign aggression.
And now China is fighting back.
We must be ready to fight, build our ability, and keep striving to secure new victories in this struggle.
So the modern Communist Party of China is engaged in a project to restore the greatness of China, to make China great again. Okay, right, but this is just a political speech. Why do we care if this guy's romanticizing the history a little bit? It doesn't really matter, right? No, actually, it does matter.
Bam. Take a chill pill.
What I want to show you is that Xi Jinping and the Communist Party use this story to justify terrible things. Mass assimilation of people to be controlled by the central government of Beijing. So to do this, let me just quickly go back and we can do a time lapse of this region of Asia and what it looked like over the past few thousand years to sort of fact check Xi Jinping.
Here is China, cradle of civilization in Asia.
What we think of as Chinese culture or Chinese civilization has indeed been around for thousands of years. It was born here along the Yangtze River, where a lot of the language, political systems, writing, art, all of those traditions sort of originated. But from there, the idea of a contiguous, unified China becomes kind of a myth. I'm going to put the modern borders of China on this map so that you can see what really is happening here. Over thousands of years, if you were to look at this territory, you would see all sorts of land configurations. Looking at this, you can see that China goes from these periods of unity to periods of total division. Over the past several thousand years, China has gone from a bunch of divided kingdoms to periods of total unity where lots of good things happen. Technology, agriculture, unity, power. During times of division, bad things happened. The country was in chaos, there was destruction, there was war, there was lawlessness. And this just keeps on happening for thousands of years, a seemingly endless cycle of unity and then division. Xi Jinping is very right that out of this region, during some of these unified periods, came like real serious advancements in shipping and math and like gunpowder and all of these things that like have informed how we've all developed as a world. This part of Eastern Asia was definitely on the forefront, but it was never one contiguous China for thousands of years. And the upshot was very clear. Unity meant prosperity and technology and all these good things, and disunity equals chaos and bad things. Okay, so it's now the 1700s, and over in Europe, the new fad is imperialism. Right. Yeah. European countries who are looking for more land so that they can expand their borders, send their armies, and everyone's doing it. It's the French, it's the British, it's the Spanish, it's even the Japanese are starting to get on board with this. And over here, in today what we call China, they had once again slipped into a period of serious disunity. They were divided, but this time it came with an extra dose of humiliation.
It's not for nothing that the period stretching around 100 years from the 1840s to the 1940s is known as China's Century of Humiliation.
This era of disunity in China came from outsiders. You can see this political cartoon, all of these barbarians at the door vying to carve up and slice up China for their own profit. China was once again in the dumps, and it was here, while European and Japanese powers were dividing up their land, that China learned its second crucial lesson. Not just that unity is better, but that if you want to survive in this brave new world, you have to play by the new rules. And those rules were very clearly laid out by these European empires. Defined borders, a patriotic agenda, assimilating other cultures into their own. This was the playbook the Europeans were playing by, and it was working. Okay, so fast forward now, it's like the 1900s. It's the beginning of the communist revolution that would eventually envelop this entire country. The communist leaders were small still at this point, and they used this century of humiliation and division, as well as this general lesson of unity equals prosperity, to rally the people for a new cause. The revolutionaries are like, we've been sliced up and divided by all of these foreign powers, and when we're divided, we fail. Remember? Exhibit A, B, and C. So these communist leaders went off and created this grand vision of a united China, a story that China had actually always been united. They framed it in terms of this former glory of what China used to be, what it was before the outsiders came in, a grandiose vision of the past that never really existed. I mean, again, this sounds pretty darn familiar.
We will make America strong again, proud again, safe again, great again.
And that became the grand plan of the Communist Revolution in China, to make China united again, despite the fact that China had never really been fully united. Not like this, but the story, this vision, was a potent rallying cry. China would never be cut up again, never humiliated. They would have defined borders, ethnic purity, cultural assimilation. And so for the last 70 years, that's the great project that China and the Communist Party have been undertaking, creating their own great empire, controlled by a central authority. This project has coincided with China getting rich, pulling 100 million people out of poverty and becoming a global superpower, all just in a few decades. All of this has given the government a lot of resources with which to execute their project of forcefully uniting a swath of land that isn't and has never been united. And I want to show you what that looks like.
The issue of China ruling over autonomous regions is controversial. So what are China's autonomous regions, and are they really all that autonomous?
This is the map that most people are familiar with when they think of China. But this outline doesn't tell you the whole story, because nearly half of this land is considered autonomous. Super jargony term. What does that even mean? There are over 56 ethnicities in China, most of them concentrated far away from Beijing, like over here in Tibet or over here in Xinjiang. When those communist leaders were setting up their new unified China empire, they kind of admitted, like, okay, there are a lot of cultures and languages and identities within this country. We should let these people govern themselves. Not entirely, of course. They still have to answer to Beijing with certain things, but they would have autonomy, autonomous regions. But many of these semi-autonomous regions, like Xinjiang, Tibet, and Southern Mongolia, these places were never originally a part of any conception of China. They were forcefully absorbed by the Chinese Communist Party during its nation-building project, like in the past 70 years. Okay, let's get specific here. Xinjiang is a region that is very far from Beijing, not just geographically, but also culturally. It is a huge region, roughly the size of Alaska, has 25 million people, and half of those people identify as Uyghur, which are mostly Muslims who are from a Turkic descent, not like a Han Chinese descent. They come from a different culture. The street signs are not in any Chinese language, they're in like the Uyghur Turkic language. The architecture looks a lot more at home in like Istanbul than it does in Beijing, and 5 times a day, the streets fill with the sound of prayer. Xinjiang was an independent republic twice before, but eventually it was overthrown by China. 8 years after China grabbed Xinjiang, the Chinese government did the same thing to an even more remote region at the highest plateau in the world, Tibet. They annexed this place that is 3 times the size of Texas. It has its own very distinct language, culture, identity, and does not identify or connect with Beijing. And back in the day, again, when China wasn't rich and powerful, they couldn't really wrangle these regions until suddenly they got rich really fast.
Second in GDP only to the United States.
And for the past 30 to 40 years, China has been pouring money and people into these 2 regions to make them more like China. It's kind of like the geopolitical version of gentrification. It's basically where non-Chinese societies are subsumed by societal norms of Han Chinese culture because of a bunch of militarization and money. So in Tibet, you see this in the Tibetan schools that are only teaching in Mandarin, not in the traditional Tibetan language. Or you see it in Xinjiang, where the mosques are torn down for being too Islamic and are rebuilt in traditional Chinese styles. Oh, and it starts to get a lot worse. In Xinjiang, the Uyghurs are literally taken away by the millions and forced into concentration camps, where they're supposedly forcibly taught Chinese values. The government is involved in a mass sterilization project where they are forcibly inserting IUDs and other birth control forms to basically run them into extinction. And not just like 10 people, like millions of people. China originally gave these people autonomy because they recognized that they had their own culture and they wanted to retain it. But now they've totally thrown that deal out the window. The way this presents most commonly in these regions is just the presence of military and police. There are checkpoints everywhere, there's restricted movement, there's constant surveillance. And every year that passes by, it becomes harder. These people resist, they fight back, they commit acts of terror. And in response, China sends more military, more police, and more surveillance equipment. In 2018, China spent $10 billion in security in Xinjiang. That's almost double the year before, and 10 times as much as it was 10 years previous. $3 billion of those dollars go into these re-education camps. That's 4 times more than the previous year. I mean, it's ramping up. They're pouring money into these regions. Per person, China spends 3,100 yuan on security in Tibet, 2,400 in Xinjiang per person. Compare that to the national average of 763 yuan per person, and you can see that every single person in these regions is worth a lot more in terms of the cost of making them assimilate. So the question is, why? Why is China doing this? Why are they investing so much money into occupying and forcibly assimilating these people? Well, there are several geopolitical and economic reasons why the Communist Party wants to do this. First off, the resources. Xinjiang produces 87% of the country's cotton, for example. And when it comes to Tibet, you can see that they provide a buffer between China and India. Tibet also has the largest freshwater supply in the world, given where they are so high up. China also uses these regions as a part of their big infrastructure initiative, the Belt and Road Initiative. They use infrastructure to connect these regions to continue to fortify their economic standing in the world. But I believe the real reason is this myth of a united China, because a united China is a strong China. A divided China is a chaotic China. This has been the rallying cry for 70 years, but it's not just assimilation within their borders. This myth has also fueled and justified China's adventures in expansion elsewhere.
This is the South China Sea. China says it will fight to the very end to prevent Taiwan from being declared independent.
The former British colony is being smashed into submission.
So now you have China building islands in the South China Sea, claiming that this entire ocean belongs to them? Oh, that's just China reclaiming what was rightfully theirs. Because after all, this ocean's been theirs for 5,000 years. They're just reclaiming it. Violating its promise to let Hong Kong stay independent and absorbing it into China piece by piece? Oh, that's just China restoring sovereignty over these islands that Britain stole in like the 1800s. How about an invasion of Taiwan to unite it forcibly with China? All they're doing is restoring China back to the way it was. But again, this was never the case. This is a story constructed 70 years ago to unify a country that was on the brink of collapse. This story today is weaponized and used by Xi Jinping and the Communist Party to justify almost everything that they're doing.
Achieving national rejuvenation will be no walk in the park. It will take more than drum beating and gong clanging to get there. Every one of us in the party must be prepared to work even harder toward this goal.
Okay, so to end this, I just want to say one last thing, which is I have no interest in bashing on China and Chinese culture. There's so much beauty that comes from this region of the world. And as I mentioned, every one of the countries out there, including my own, are guilty of a weaponized history. The reason I'm concerned and focused on this is because this mythical fake story that China is using, it can't be fact-checked within China. So instead, the Chinese government is able to use this story as a weapon to justify the oppression of its people, the grabbing of land. And honestly, looking at it, how it's playing out, it's just a modern day version straight out of the old European imperialistic handbook.